would like to thank all of the individuals and organizations that have helped make tonight's screening possible, as well as all the screenings here at the Billy Wilder Theater. All of the shows at the Billy Wilder Theater are free thanks to a gift from an anonymous donor, and we are grateful to them for their support. I also want to give a big thank you to our special guest of honor, Robert Carl Cohen, and his daughter, Dianna Cohen, for all their help and support in making this program possible. Let's give everybody a round of applause for that. So tonight is the second of our two-night program celebrating the work of filmmaker Robert Carl Cohen. How many people were here for Mondo Hollywood on Friday night? That was a really special screening. That was really a wonderful night. And I know tonight will be too. So thank you for coming out. In addition to his work behind and in front of the camera, Robert has had a storied career as a foreign correspondent, author, photographer, and lecturer. Born in 1930, Robert graduated from UCLA with a bachelor's degree in 1952 and earned his MFA from UCLA School of Theater Arts and Motion Pictures in 1954 for his thesis film, The Color of Man. After attending the Sorbonne in Paris, where he pursued a doctorate in social psychology, he found himself embarked on a professional journey that would be the subject of a movie, that could be the subject of a movie itself, and probably should be. As the Cold War deepened in the late 1950s and early 1960s, Robert traveled the world as a foreign correspondent for NBC and as an independent documentary producer. In films such as Inside Red China and film lectures on East Germany and Cuba under Castro, Robert presented U.S. audiences with their first glimpses into countries and peoples on the other side of the ideological conflict that dominated their lives at the time. Assuming the risks of being the first U.S. journalist allowed to film in these far-flung places, Robert showed equal courage at home when he turned his camera on how the Cold War was impacting the politics and culture of the United States. Case in point, his 1962 essay film, Committee on Un-American Activities, which was the first film made by a U.S. citizen to directly challenge the U.S. government and its Cold War-determined domestic policies. Tonight's program will begin with Inside Red China from 1957, and we followed immediately by Committee on Un-American Activities. After the films, I'll be joined on stage by Robert and Dianna for a post-screening conversation that, promise me, you do not want to miss. Please stick around for that. I could not be happier and more honored to have Bob here and to be able to celebrate his career at UCLA. But please help me welcome right now Robert Carl Cohen.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. The first film that we're going to see, Inside Red China. Just a couple words before the film. Having gotten my bachelor's and master's at UCLA, I had never taken a single course on China, nor attended a lecture on China. In fact, I knew nothing whatsoever about China. And if I had to make a list of competency, I would have put myself at the bottom of the list. Now, I happened to find myself in Europe, in the U.S. Army, and I completed my service in the U.S. Army in Paris and began living in Paris as a student for the doctorate in social psychology. In the summer of 1957, there was a World Youth Festival in Moscow, and to which I had no interest in going there. I was having a perfectly nice time in Paris. The men had all died in World War II. I had 7 women friends registered my hotel room. I was having a perfectly good time on the GI Bill, and I was not looking for trouble in any way, shape, or form. But this World Youth Festival was taking place in Moscow, and I saw an ad in the New Statesman and Nation, which I was capable of reading because I couldn't read French yet at the time, having studied Latin here at Belmont High. And it said that for about $130, any American who happened to be in Europe could go to Moscow for 2 weeks, room and board, and return. And I thought, well, World War III is about to come. I learned about that in the military at Supreme Headquarters. I might as well go to Moscow and see what it is before the world comes to an end. So I and 4 or 5 other Americans who were hanging out in Paris Shel Silverstein, the name might be familiar. He became a cartoonist for Playboy. We went to Moscow, and we spent 2 weeks partying in Moscow, drunk most of the time. At the end of the Moscow festival, the Chinese invited everybody to come to China. Now, I wasn't interested. I knew nothing about China. I was approached by Dan Shore, who was the CBS bureau chief, because I had done research for a show called Adventure, the American Museum of Natural History in New York. While I was in the military at Fort Monmouth, I did research on random genetic drift, a rather esoteric subject. And Dan Shore said to me, "Are you going to accept an invitation to China?" I said, "Dan, if I do, my name is going to be on the blacklist. I'll never get a clearance. I'll never, not that I want to work for the government, but, I had no interest in doing so. But I have no interest in going there." He said, "If you do, will you film for CBS?" I said, "Well, that creates a dilemma. Because obviously, if the world is going to come to an end, maybe I can help delay it for a few days by doing something. And if CBS is interested in paying me to go to China, even though I know nothing about China, I guess I better go." Well, the next day, Dan Shore said, "I spoke to New York, and New York will not support anyone who defies the travel ban to China." I said, "Then I'm not going to go. I have no personal interest in it." He said, "But Irv Levine of NBC wants to talk to you." "Oh," I said, "I begin to see the picture here." NBC, Standard Oil. Standard Oil was in China. Standard Oil wants to get back into China. They're ready to defy the ban on travel to China by having somebody go there and make a film. So I went and saw Irv Levine. And I said, "What will you do for me?" He said, "We'll give you an old camera. You're going to leave in 2 days. We'll give you a few rolls of film. We don't have any." I said, "Will you pay me?" He said, "No, but we'll pay you if we use any of the film." So I took their old camera and about 6 rolls of film, about 20 minutes of film. I filmed in China. It was all shipped to New York before it was processed. They only bought about 1.5 minutes of film from me. And they gave me a cardboard box with a bunch of scraps of film in it. I took that film and I re-edited it into a silent lecture film, and I began lecturing in colleges about China. And I found out that there was a great curiosity about China that was not being filled in any way. And eventually I put a soundtrack on it and had it syndicated as part of the Special of the Week series. So that's what we're going to see. It's called Inside Red China. Now, of course, after coming back from China, I tried to read about China. I tried to study. I tried to figure out where I had been and what it meant. And so what you're going to see is not a film made by an expert on China who knew all about China and went there and made a film. What you're about to see is a collection of newsreels made by someone who knew nothing about China while I was filming there. And I tried to figure out what relevance it might have when I came back. I hope that it answers some questions. I'm sure that there's a lot more information. Coincidentally enough, I've been back to China several times since, most recently
2015.
7 years ago. And what I found was that the Chinese did not have the film that I had taken of China. They had destroyed their own newsreels. And so my films of China are unusual because the Chinese don't have their own films of that same period of 57. Not that I'm aware of. At any rate, after the show, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you may have. Okay?
What's the other film we're going to see?
The other film we're going to have, well, I'll talk about that later.
Well, can you just introduce it? Because we're going to sit down and watch them both.
My daughter insists.
on Un-American Activities.
Committee on Un-American Activities is a political history of the Un-American Activities Committee that I made because nobody else would do such a film, and no one else has done one before or since. And so it's about an American government function that nobody has made a film about. And I happen to make it. I'll be happy to we'll deal with that after China. But right now, let's go inside Red China. Thank you.
So please help me welcome to the stage Robert Carl Cohen and Dianna Cohen. Another round of applause for Bob. Another evening of deja vu, I think.
Thanks for sitting and watching it. When I made that film a long time ago, I never thought that this many years later, what is it now?
2022, I think.
When I made the film in '62, I never thought there would be a reason for looking at it today. But unfortunately, watching television these days and seeing the crap that's spewed by members of our government, I can only... well, I'm happy I made the film, and I'm sad that I had to make it. And I'm very happy that UCLA is showing it today.
Well, we're honored to show it, of course, Bob, and it's an honor to have you here. And there's so many questions because watching the film again, Mondo Hollywood, Inside Red China, so many of your films, you were working at a time and dealing with issues and subjects that we are still grappling with today. I mean, like every day. But I wanted to go back. So going back to that time, you talked about how Inside Red China came about. NBC sent you there. Can you talk about when you got back to the States and were on the lecture tour? You were very successful lecturing with the film and talking about the film with audiences. What do you think why were American audiences so interested in the film? And what do you think their response was? Or what was their response to your lecture and your talk about Inside Red China?
Well, I did not have any, I was devoid of ambition, okay? Why was I devoid of ambition? Because in 1945, as a 15-year-old, I was sitting in a movie theater looking at a newsreel, and I saw the first A-bomb go off. And I had been very interested in science since I was 9 or 10 years old. I was the youngest member of the LA Science Fantasy Society in 1942. Okay, as a 12-year-old. And when I saw that nuke go off, based on what I knew, I said the world is going to come to an end very soon. Mm-hmm. Because we now have the capability of building a device, and if we can do it, everybody can do it. Mm-hmm. And it's going to happen. It's inevitable. Any weapon that can be built gets built. And so as of August 1945, I just said, hey, I might as well have a good time because no ambition will mean the world is going to come to an end, okay? I don't feel that much different today, frankly. So I got drafted. In order to stay out of Korea, because whereas World War II was my kind of war, as a 15-year-old, I was very disappointed that the war ended before I could kill anybody. I mean, as a 14-year-old, I was practicing gouging out eyes and slitting throats, all the things that 14-year-olds practice during a war. But by the time Korea came along, I was 19 years old, and I was already a student here at UCLA, and I knew all about soybean futures and Dillon Reed and Company and investment. I had a quite different attitude than I had as a 15-year-old. And I said, well, the world is going to come to an end. We're going to blow the place up. Okay, one way or another, somebody's going to do it. Okay, there's no way to keep this secret. Okay. And so I'd become an existentialist. Nothing mattered, might as well have a good time. I stayed in college to stay out of Korea. Korea ended just at the time that I got my master's degree. I got drafted. I was a star in the Army. I was the director at Fort Monmouth. In the Signal Corps Pictorial Center in New York wanted me to make training films. And in the middle of this whole fight between those two installations, Paris reached out. The U.S. Army in Paris heard about me. They like baseball players, they like football players, they like film producers and so on. And I get orders to go to Paris to make movies for NATO. Okay? I like Paris. I knew nothing about it before getting there as a typical UCLA graduate. And I found out, wow, it's groovy here. The men were dead from World War II. There was nothing but women. And as a 24-year-old, on the GI Bill, with access to the PX, and I could buy silk stockings. I could all the things that women need to live.
And you were a good dancer.
I had 7 women registered in my hotel room. I had no ambition. I loved Paris, and I found out that I could make a living in Paris by writing cartoons, as you saw Mr. Wister. So I thought I'd write a little peace cartoon. Now, people have accused me of a certain amount of prescience. What is that flower that makes everybody feel peaceful? Mm-hmm. Does it have anything to do with drugs? Mm-hmm. No, I just thought it was a cute idea. Since then, it has taken on a different life, a different meaning. But I was having a perfectly good time in Paris, and I could make a living in Paris by writing little cute cartoons and all that. I wasn't interested in Russia. I wasn't interested in China. Right. I went there because it was such a bargain. Right. I couldn't resist the temptation. And then I get there, and I get roped into this whole thing of going to China and filming for NBC. Right. I come back to the States because they wouldn't renew my passport after that. And I got back here, and people started giving me thousands of dollars to stand up and show a movie and speak on stage. Well, I couldn't resist that. Of course. Okay? And so I was having a perfectly good time wandering around, showing films in colleges, and making lots of money. And that's how I got involved in all this stuff.
But why do you think audiences were paying you thousands of dollars to see the film? What was the American public, what were they looking for in your film? What do you think they were looking for?
The impression I got was that I don't say the average American, but certainly the university audience, the educated people and the aware people, wanted to know what was going on in the world. And were not getting it from the media, and they still don't. I mean, I learned that directly from NBC. NBC made a deal with me to film in China. I gave them footage. You saw the footage. There was Chairman Mao, there was Zhou Enlai, there's the Chinese Air Force. They didn't buy any of that. they bought a minute and a half of American students and gave me back all the footage that they had not shown to the public, which you saw here.
What was the footage that they wanted of the American What was the footage they wanted of the American students?
Their story was American students defy the travel ban. And so they showed some shots. We didn't see that. I didn't even keep it. Okay? It belongs to NBC. I come back to New York and I'm handed a cardboard box full of scraps of negative. Here are Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, the Chinese Air Force, all the things that you think that our network would like to show our public. No.
Bob, can I jump in for a second? What was, you've told me the story before, but what was the situation where you got to go and meet Zhou Enlai?
Where, who?
When you met Zhou Enlai.
Oh, Zhou Enlai. Okay. The Chinese told us that any Americans that wanted to interview Zhou Enlai at the seat of the state council were invited to do so. Well, I'm working for NBC and I've got their camera. I assume that filming Zhou Enlai and interviewing him would be of interest to NBC. That's why I went there. Okay. And then, each one of us was entitled to ask him one question. Okay? Well, David Chipp, the Reuters correspondent, kept whispering in my ear, ask him about Israel. Okay? You know, why doesn't China recognize Israel? I thought, Chipp wants me to ask him that because my name is Cohen. Okay? I don't know dreck about Israel. I'm a typical university graduate. It means I don't know anything about much of anything. And I thought it was more interesting, the question that I asked him, than to ask him about Israel. And I did. And, you know, that's the answer to that.
What did you ask him? Now we have to know what you asked him.
You saw the movie.
Sure. But the film itself, I mean, it's for the period of time such an even-handed presentation, and it's probably not surprising to hear that NBC only wanted like a little bit of it because you're talking about industrialization, you're talking about culture, you're talking about transformation, and you're doing it in a very objective way. I think it's a very objective document. We're talking about the Cold War. Your films are talking. Basically, I think your films are offering a counter narrative to the major narrative at the time. Were people surprised by the film when you brought it back?
I am a graduate of this institution. I learned many things. And I thought that the public would be interested, okay? And I found that I could actually earn a lot of money by going to universities, and I did to many of them, around the U.S. and Canada and so on, that there were people in our country, especially on the university level, who wanted to know what was going on. Now, I was not an expert, but at least I had filmed things, and then I went. After I came back from being in China, I read about China to know where I had been and what I had filmed and what it meant. Right. Because when I was filming it, I didn't know what I was doing. Right. I was guessing. And I found out that there is a big audience in the United States of educated, responsible people who want to know what's going on. Right. And that they were willing to pay me to share what little information I had with them.
Well, so I have a few more questions, and we'll turn it over to the audience. When I call on you to ask your question, you can just raise your hand. We're going to bring a mic to you, so please wait for the mic and think of some questions, because I'll turn it over to the audience in a little bit. So with that in mind, though, let's turn to Committee on Un-American Activities. You were some of your work, many of your films were, if not commissioned, you were asked to go by, you were hired to go and do some work, and you created the lecture series, created your films. But Committee on Un-American Activities, was your project that initiated with you and your interest in trying to respond to the committee. Can you talk about how the film came about?
Some people contacted me.
Okay.
I think they were members of the Communist Party. I never asked them. Okay. And they wanted to make an anti-Un-American Activities Committee film. Okay? And they contacted me. And I said, well, I hadn't thought about it, but I'll start reading about it and studying about it. And I started doing that. Mm-hmm. And I started writing a script and working on it. And the people who had contacted me didn't like what I was doing. Mm-hmm. They wanted me to make a movie saying the Un-American Activities Committee is a fascist Nazi organization and should be abolished. And I said, I'm more interested in understanding why something comes into existence, who supports it, why support, and all that. I'm spoiled by having a university education at UCLA. Okay. Not that all my instructors here agreed with that. Okay. And so I told these people, I'm sorry, I'm not going to accept any money from you. You've got me interested in this topic, right, and I'm going to do it the way I think it should be done. Right. And I went and found that there were people, Jimmy Roosevelt and other people had made statements, and I think it's important to understand. Now, would it be a good idea to have a committee that investigates un-American activities? Yeah, that would be a committee that investigates anybody who tries to suppress free speech. Mm-hmm. In fact, that would be a committee that would be trying to investigate a good part of contemporary politics.
I think we have one of those right now. But
I mean, we've had a president who thinks he still is the president, right, who is absolutely opposed to this democratic system, okay? And there are people who despise the democratic system and want us to have a dictatorship that they control. I don't think that's a good idea. And anything I can do to oppose it, I try to do.
Well, that brings me to another question. We talked about this on Friday night with Mondo Hollywood. Where were you? You were dealing with these very controversial issues in a very challenging time, where to say the wrong thing, to do the wrong thing, you might end up on a blacklist. Sounds familiar. What were your personal politics, if you don't mind getting into it? How did you negotiate your own personal politics with the politics of the time and through your films, which also seem very objective? I mean, were you with the counterculture? Would you see yourself as a counterculture figure at that time?
It's a complex question. Essentially, I became a student of psychology. Okay. I was working for a doctorate in social psych at the University of Paris, which I never completed. In fact, I'm a dropout from 3 different doctoral programs. Okay. And the whole acid scene came into existence. And people were saying to me, take acid, take acid, take acid. I said, well, I'm not on principle opposed to anything. I'll go hang out with these people and see what that's like. So I went and I sat with Dickie Alpert, Dr. Richard Alpert, later Ram Dass. Okay? I sat with him for hours as a parade of people came through to tell him about their acid experiences. And I took notes and listened to all this. And I realized that it was so subjective on the part of the people involved that, it was a subjective experience. Then I became very friendly with Dr. Eric Cast in Chicago, a personal friend. And he was using LSD with terminal cancer patients, which today has come back into popularity, okay? And that was of interest to me as well. But by sitting with Albert and everything else, so I went to film an acid party, okay? I took cameras and lights with me. There was nothing to film. There were people looking at candles. I can look at a candle. What am I going to point the camera at somebody looking at a candle and say, this is somebody having an acid trip? It's in your head. Now, a terrible thing happened at that party. After I left the party, while I was at the party, there was a little baby, a 1-year-old child. And these people were fawning over it. Its innocence and its purity and so on. What do you expect with a 1-year-old? Evidently, someone either breathed on it or touched it and got it, gave it acid, and the baby subsequently died. They couldn't get to it with the ambulance because so many people's cars were blocking the driveway and the people were so stoned they couldn't move their cars. I left and I heard about that afterwards. And I said, it's a very bad scene. You know, now the interesting thing is that today, or according to the press, using lysergic acid and other things to deal with problems, mental illness and so on, seems to be, there's more research being done now. There's been a resurgence of research. And which I think is still very, very difficult because my impression is it's very, very subjective and it's very difficult to do any research on it. But I never took the stuff. Right. People said, take acid, take acid, take acid. And I said, if I take acid, I'll start behaving like the people I've seen, and they're all someplace else. I don't want to be someplace else. I want to be here, and I want to know what's going on here.
But so you were but that's the thing is you're very engaged with the current contemporary moment in your films. But on the politics side, you had to walk a line between the communists you wanted to say one thing, the government saying it wanted to do another thing. Do you have any feelings about how did you negotiate or navigate? You just did your own thing.
These are areas that one deals with at great risk. Because everybody's got a position. And unless you take their position, they think you're on the other side. Okay? Mm-hmm. Let's take communism. Okay. I went to Russia because it was only $130 to go from London to Moscow, return, and have 2 weeks room and board in Moscow and have a lot of parties. Okay? I went to Moscow to have a good time because I figured the world was going to come to an end. We were going to blow everybody up, and I still think that's a very strong possibility.
But did you ever have an opinion on communism?
My opinion was that I met some communists who were idealists. Mm-hmm. I met a lot of them who were opportunists, especially in the Russian government. Right. I mean, I remember particularly Furtseva, the Minister of Culture of Russia, who came here in 1960. And I was a member of a group called Turn Towards Peace. And we took Furtseva and some of these people to the movies, right? And she was wearing some kind of a diamond dress, in addition to being like 200 pounds overweight. And I said, the Minister of Culture of Russia is this fat, overdressed woman, right, covered with diamonds. Mm-hmm. That doesn't smell right to me. I mean, you know, after I'd been to all these places, I started reading about it. I read Materialism and Imperial Criticism by Lenin, but very few people in this audience even have heard about it. I tried to understand the theoretical basis, okay? Karl Marx was a journalist. He wrote for the New York Herald Tribune. He was describing the economic relationships of that period. Okay? He wasn't inventing a philosophy. People who call themselves Marxists, they're really reaching way out. Because if you go and you read what he wrote, he said middle-class business people have quite different interests than working people. What's the big revelation? Okay, I'm a member of I joined the Teamsters Union when I was 15 years old. I lied about my age. I said I was 16. Why? Because I was getting paid $1 an hour to work in the freight yards here in L.A. I still got my union card, okay? My father was a union guy. My father was a wallpaper hanger, and I worked with him. My childhood was based on working at different jobs with union people. We didn't work with non-union people. We called them scabs because they took the job away from union people, right, which meant my father and my mother, right, who were both union people. I was and still am all for organizations of working people and any kind of people who organize to protect their interests. Okay? Right. Basically, that's what I believe in. I believe in self-interest and people organizing and working together for mutual interest. Mm-hmm. When your personal interest conflicts with other people, when you're hurting other people, that's no good. You have to accommodate. You have to adjust yourself. You can't say, I want what's best for me, screw everybody else, because then somebody will say, okay, there's more of us than there are of you, or we've got more guns than you've got, or something of that kind. My philosophy is cooperative, supportive relationship based upon knowledge. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it still is today.
Okay, Paul, can I just add something? I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Committee on American Activities, you made that movie in which year? 1962. Okay, so just for perspective for everybody here, I didn't know my dad, obviously, before I was born. And I was born when you were about 35, 36?
I was born in 1930.
No, me. I was born when you were 35?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when he was in Russia and China, he was 26 years old and 27 years old. And I'm always trying to keep that perspective in my mind of the age he was when he was trying to navigate this and make these films. He had his 27th birthday in China in 1957.
Pretty amazing. So let's turn it over to the audience. If we have any questions, raise your hand, and I'll have the mic. How about right here on the aisle? Or mic coming over to you right here.
I am astonished and blown away by your film about the House Un-American Activities Committee. And the reason I say that, actually, my aunt was Lillian Hellman. My grandfather worked with Jack Warner, and I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and of course all my life I've seen the pictures of African Americans being hosed down, during the Civil Rights Movement. I've never seen this footage ever before, and I've been on the planet a long time. Not quite as long as yourself, but so I'm just wondering if any of you have any idea why this really important footage, that happened outside of the San Francisco State House or whatever, has never been seen. Or at least it hasn't in my mind. You always see McCarthy and you see the hearings and that kind of thing, but you never see, what happened with these hearings that were around the country. So thank you so much.
What was the history of House Committee? What was the history of its exhibition? Where did you show it? Who saw it? And what happened to the film?
The Un-American Activities Committee film actually got pretty fair sales on the college level. Mm-hmm. Okay. I found out that there may still be, there are people in our country, especially connected with educational institutions.
Could you hold the mic? Bob, I'm sorry, just bring the mic.
Especially connected with educational institutions, UCLA being one of them, right, who would like to know what the truth is, right, what was really happening. However, generally speaking, the subject is not taught. It's not discussed. I don't know what's taught here at UCLA today, but I doubt that there's a single course that deals with the Committee on Un-American Activities or that period in U.S. history. I doubt it, but I could be wrong. Somebody here might know. I see a hand up in the back there. Okay.
Hold on, was it? Well, I think the film is definitely, highly relevant today, and I think it provides a lot of context for conversations we're still having today. So let's I was going to say also, we have a copy of Operation Abolition. If you'd ever want to research it, we have a 16 millimeter copy in the archive collection here at UCLA, which you can access through the Powell Library if you're interested in checking it out. Another question from the audience. Let's go to the woman who just spoke. Right, the woman. There you go. Mike's coming down to you. Right, you're right there. Yeah.
Francis.
I have a comment and a question. Again, just like you, I love seeing new things and learning about things in our history that have never been revealed before. And I'm hoping that this will be televised or streamed or something like that, because seeing 60 years ago, that huge group of people, I've never seen anything like that, and it's coming round again. That's my comment. Thank you so much for your films.
You're welcome.
But my question is, how did you meet your wife?
How did I what?
How did you
Oh
meet
dear, I didn't know
your
that.
wife?
This lady here.
How did you meet your current wife, Kim, is the question.
How did I meet my current wife? Can I tell? Okay. Prepare yourselves. My entire life has been devoted to trying to have a good time, to trying to enjoy myself, okay? I don't carry a whip. I'm not a flagellante. I don't believe in suffering, okay? I try to eat, and I try to do things that feel good, okay? And one day, some guy said to me, why don't you come up to Topanga? There's a place up here where you can go around naked. I said, are there women? He said, yeah, lots of women. I said, there's naked women? So I went up there, and there were naked women, okay? And I started giving seminars in the nude, in a hot tub, where people were paying me to take off their clothes and get in the water and have me lead them in seminars. So everybody had a clipboard, and I said, on your clipboard, write down anything you feel like writing down. So everybody would write for half an hour and then hand in their paper, and then I would read them their paper. And they were paying me to do that. I despise you. I despise this kind of workshop. I said, groovy, thanks for paying for it. So I was having a perfectly good time. Of course, occasionally I would watch TV and say, well, the end of the world is coming, any moment now. And one day, I was up there, and I met my wife-to-be. And she was up there.
She was a participant in the seminar, or?
Yeah, she didn't pay for one of my workshops. She was hanging out with some French tarot card reader.
Well, I think we should rethink our Q&A format.
Anyway, we got into a conversation, and I said to her, you have not had many, many years of higher education, unlike myself, 3 universities and so on. I said, however, the way you speak and your logic sequence, you're a smart person who knows what they're talking about. If you could do or be anything, what would it be? And she said, I'd like to go back to college and become a nurse or midwife. So I said, then why don't you do it? And she said, my husband doesn't want me to. I said, are you living with your husband? She said, no. I said, then why don't you do what you want to do? So she did.
There you go.
And we got married.
Yay. So we have time for a couple more questions. So let's go. Let's come down here in front. Gentleman right here. We're going to bring the mic down to you.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen, it was very interesting to meet you. And I just have a question regarding for the China.
You have to speak louder.
Oh,
My hearing has
okay.
gotten very bad.
I have a question regarding for the China, right? The Xi's plane, the next plane. And also I know what's going on very closely because I watch, not regular media, I watch a lot of like Taiwanese political talk show. So they always have a discussion regarding for, daily news and daily what's going on activity.
He's watching Taiwanese talk shows too.
Right, political talk show. So my question is, the next thing, the Taiwan, they're gonna have a semiconductor, right now in Nano 3.
Right. Taiwan's going to have a new semiconductor, Nano 3 semiconductor.
Right, the Nano
Yeah.
3.
Taiwan.
Right now it's far. This is developing.
Yeah.
Then what happened in another 3 years, right? It's gonna be Nano 1. So my question is, right now, either Russia and China, they don't have this technology yet. Mm-hmm. So that's what's going on right now. That's why right now U.S. try to block what's the situation right now.
US is trying to block it because Russia and
So-
China don't have this technology. but
Right. So my
Taiwan
question
is
is
developing it.
I read something about that.
right, the semiconductor. So this is gonna be the next oil, very important in the future. It's almost like a Terminator, Skynet ships, stuff like
Right.
that. Anyway, so.
What's your question?
Oh, okay. My question. I just would like to hear your opinion about it. Yeah.
Oh, what's your opinion about
Right.
this?
About the Taiwanese
And
development?
then, right. Taiwan and China. and
Semiconductor?
Right.
I feel flattered to be asked about a topic that I'm not an expert on.
I know what you mean, but you can do the best you can. I know because I like to hear your eccentric.
I think, like any other technology, it depends on how it's used. Okay? It could be used for good or it could be used for not good, depending on who owns it and who controls it. I hope that it's used to benefit people. That's the best I can do.
Oh, by the way, what you talk about the nuke, right? Don't worry about it. U.S. is watching it. But MQ, one of those like MQ, whatever the number, they're all watching it. So as long as anybody, right, when it's launch a nuclear, they will see it. It's the launch of nuclear. It's not just like you launch it like right away. You have to really, prepare.
Right.
So they were watching it. So before that thing happened, right, they will destroy it.
He's saying just before you launch something nuclear, sorry,
The-
that China's watching that you have to, there's a procedure to launch something. It's not that easy just to launch something.
exactly.
What can I say about it?
Right. No, I'm just kind of to tell you.
I mean, I respect you asking me questions about such esoteric subjects, but it would be presumptuous of me to have an opinion about things that I'm certain that I know very little about.
No, I'm just kind of give you the perspective.
So we should move on to the next question.
it.
So we have one more question from the audience. Let's go right here. Right here.
Thank you. Hey, Bob.
Hi.
My question is also about inside Red China. Is that loud enough?
Yeah.
Okay. My question was, since you didn't know a lot about China when you were there, when you were filming, and you had to do a bunch of research later, I'm interested in knowing how much do you think that affected how you edited the footage and what you used and what you didn't, learning exactly what you had seen.
She's saying, so you didn't know much about China when you filmed there. Then you came back and researched it, and she's just wondering how that impacted the way you edited the film when you put the film together.
Well, my editing of the film and the way I put it together is totally dependent on the research that I did after I came back from filming, because I had film and I didn't know what it meant. In many cases, I didn't know who the names of the people involved or what their positions were and so on. I knew a big building was a big building. That's about it. I was as equipped as, let's say, you would be if you found yourself in a country that you had never been to, with a language that you didn't know, and with a history that you knew nothing about, and you had a camera. What would you film? We film what we know. We film something big, okay? Or we film if people punch each other, so we film them, but filming is part of information gathering, but it's only a means, it's a technology. What you point your camera at, what you record, and how you use it is totally dependent on understanding the relationships, and you're not going to understand them just by going over there and pointing the camera. You have to know where you are, everything came from, and where it might be going. I sound like an old hippie.
Can I add something, though? Was that Bob has also gone back and filmed in China again after he made Inside Red China. So after 1957, you filmed again in 1978, 1986.
85. I've been back to China several times.
And again in 2015.
My wife and I traveled with Chinese camera crews to over 10 Chinese cities. We filmed extensively. It's unrecognizable. In Shanghai today, it is virtually impossible to find a single building that I filmed in 1957.
We did find one.
Yeah. I mean,
We found the same bank that he had filmed that was the Bank of Taiwan. That building was still standing there on the boot.
That was there, but
that was the only one, though, that I...
Basically, and not only that, but the impression I got with the Chinese is that the Chinese that you meet today have no idea what it was like in 57. You see, this is based on my readings about China, and I could be wrong. But each dynasty in Chinese history has eliminated its predecessor to the degree of changing the official color. If the royal color was green, it might become blue. In fact, they would paint the trees different colors. Now, Alice in Wonderland, 19th century British, is based essentially upon the British knowledge of China at the time. When a dynasty changes in China, they eliminate their history. And so the footage that I shot in China 57, they don't have in China today. The government has actually physically destroyed. I thought, oh, well, what's my big deal? There were cameramen all around me in 57. The Chinese were filming everything. We went back. We didn't see any footage from them. Chinese history is very, very transient. It depends on which group is in power at a given moment as to what the history is that you actually see in China. That's my experience anyway. Now, I'm sure there are scholars and there are ancient works, but from a physical point of view of newsreel material, it's very difficult to find footage from the 50s in China, shot by the Chinese.
So I'm going to take the last question and hopefully try and make it a summation question. You had talked about living under the realization that this could all end at any moment because of nuclear war, and you became a kind of existentialist. so many of the films, so many of the subjects and issues that we see depicted in your films, we're still dealing with those same issues today, but we have made some progress and we are still here, which is nice. Has your opinion about the Cold War, or your opinion about humanity in general, growing up under that fear of annihilation, has your opinion changed at all in terms of like possibilities, in terms of hope? Have you gone from an existentialist to an optimist at all? Just curious your final thoughts on where we are now.
Unfortunately, cutting through all the bullshit, the danger of a nuke war today is greater than it's ever been in the past. The presence in Washington, D.C., that I visit frequently, I have a daughter who lives there, I have many friends there in the government and so on, okay? The Trump administration, okay, which is a symptom, okay, has brought us closer to annihilation than any other event up until now. We have had someone who had control over the nukes and probably stole all the stuff and has it in their pocket at home someplace. Okay? Who doesn't have the faintest idea of I mean, we're talking about total, sheer insanity. There's no other word to describe it. Okay? On the highest level of government. And the problem is there are educated, intelligent people in Washington, D.C., as there are here as well, okay? But if they open their mouths, they'll get fired. There's a tendency, even if you know what's going on, just to keep your mouth shut and go along with it and try not to be the guy who pushes the button. But I am not optimistic. Okay.
I was hoping we might get a little optimistic.
I'd like to say, oh, it's all wonderful. The clouds are past. The fact of the matter is, from my point of view, we are in greater danger of a nuclear annihilation today than we ever have been in history.
Well, Bob, I appreciate your frankness on that. And I want to say also, I really do also appreciate it that we would be in an even worse situation if it wasn't for people like you who refuse to just go along and say nothing, and you actually did something. And the films that we've shown this weekend show that it is possible to I think make a document, to put it on record, to counter the larger narratives and to speak your mind. And so I want to just your example is really extraordinary. So it's, again, an honor to have you here on stage. And thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate it.